Dobar dan, dame I gospodo. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to have with us here today such a big number of students, and I'm especially honored that we have with us here today Your Excellencies, Ambassador of Brazil, India, Indonesia, and Malaysia. So it's a great pleasure to welcome the country manager of World Bank for Croatia, Mr. Hahm, to the Zagreb School of Economics and Management. Mr. Hahm had a very impressive international career before he started his job at the World Bank. He was running the Goldman Sachs central bank's desk in Hong Kong. He studied some time in Harvard, so it's a very impressive career, and we're very honored to have you here today. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Dr. Hahm, so please.
Thank you very much. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Croatian economy and in the context of Europe. But before, I want to take you away from Croatia for a little bit. For 30 minutes of your time, I want to take you outside Croatia, Europe, and let's talk about the world. And I'm talking really to students throughout Croatia about some of the work that you should be doing to help our world. This is the topic of today's discussion. We're having a little computer problem, so many of the animations will not occur, so I'll just walk you through them. But anyway, what I wanted to talk to you about is our world, the world we live in. We live in a world where almost more than 1.5 billion people do not have access to markets. They cannot get to any market, to sell their goods, to trade, to communicate with other people. We have more than 2.4 billion people that still use dung and wood as their fundamental fuel. And we live in a world where more than 2.5 billion people still do not have safe drinking water. Our world has a population of 7 billion people. In the next 30 years, by 2050, we will have 9 billion people. And this 9 billion people are largely coming in the developing world. In fact, we know more than 2/3 of that 2 billion people will be in the developing world. So let's look at the world's population. Almost since more than a millennium ago, our population has been relatively flat. But in the last 100 years, since the 1900s, we've seen our population increasing at an exponentially increasing rate. Increasing steeply, which you see right there. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, since the 1800s, we see it increasing at an increasing rate, but we see it increasing sharply since the 1900s. And this is partially due with the public health revolution. People are living longer, and they are healthier, and we have many more people as a whole. So we are facing a situation by 2050, we will hit 9 billion people in this world. So let me see if I can do something very fancy for you. This may be the only fancy part of my presentation. This is called www.gapminder.org. Please go into it, have a look. You can pick whatever vertical axis or horizontal axis, and almost every country in the world is part of this data set. The World Bank contributes to this data set, and this is a Swedish organization that collects all the data sets in the world. So one of the things I want to show you is when countries become rich, people live longer. And in fact, when rich countries have better medicines, better facilities, they eat better nutrition, and they live longer. So let's have a look. Let's see what that would mean. We're starting from the 1800s, and you see all the colors in orange in European countries. The United Kingdom already has a per capita income exceeding 4,000. You see that little movement that's going on. They're constantly at war in the 1800s. As we move into the 1900s, see the oranges that are shooting up. This is life expectancy versus per capita income. Europe is going up. Big yellow is the United States catching up. All the Asian countries, you see them rising. The big one is China. Indonesia is coming up. South Korea is the one that's way up ahead, and you see the African countries that are still very far behind. The blues are the Africans. Almost the data doesn't exist since the 1900s. They, as a country, did not exist until the 1900s. But their incomes goes up, not as much. Life expectancy is going up, even in African countries. Income's still low. African countries are still, in terms of age, life expectancy, they are hitting about 60, still less than 60. The advanced countries are shooting above 70, very close to, and in some cases above 80. This is the general trend that we are seeing in global population. I urge you to go here, look at this, and I give you a little homework. The homework is to look at what is the one factor that we have found that can actually reduce global population. So there's many things. We already know income is one, but income takes quite a long time to develop. Income also increases life expectancy. So in the various measures that the World Bank has been involved with world population, we've tried condom giveaways, sexual education for children, for university students. Whatever it may be, there is one thing that we found to have an incredible effect, and the most strong positive correlation as well as causal effect, and that has been girls' education. Girls' education is the single governmental intervention. Girls' education, that is elementary girls' education, secondary school girls' education, has been the one factor that has mitigated population growth throughout the world. And that is why we put so much emphasis on girls' education. That is why you see this lady, this young girl from Pakistan, her name is Malala. She nominated for the Nobel Prize. The reason we have such high admiration for her is because of her message that girls need to be educated. And this is the one common theme that we have throughout the World Bank. So, as we go back into the slideshow, we are seeing populations growing by and large in the developing world, but the other phenomenon we're seeing is population that is growing basically around the coast. All major city centers, population centers are coastal. If you look at it, you can see how, look, especially in Brazil, throughout Asia, the colors are a bit purple with the density of population, but the population centers are coastal. In fact, coastal and urban. 2 years ago, for the first time in world population, world history, we have reached a 50-50% now. 50% urban, 50% rural. And now the trend is urbanization of global populations. By 2050, we expect 66% or more of the population to be living in cities. It's a huge implication, because cities are becoming no longer Zagreb-type cities. We're talking cities with over 25 million people. These are called megacities. We used to have 10 million people as a benchmark. Now we've upped it to 25 million in megacities. And look at the megacities around the world. Megacities that cover 2% of the Earth's population, of the Earth's surface, but has most of the population, 66% of the population of the world. And look at the resource consumption of cities. So this becomes a serious issue for us to look at. Urbanization, population growth, population boom in developing countries. What do we do and how do we address it? This is really a map that shows what that actually means. And I'm going to come to the one theme, the one global challenge I want to leave with you after this talk. But this is a rather complicated graph that shows you how countries, if they grow, the developing world, when they grow, when they become industrialized, when they move out of a less developed country status and gain more income, the immediate impact is on energy consumption. The more they grow, the richer they get, the more energy they will consume. And we are showing that the energy consumption, the primary, as the countries become developed, look how high the green bars are. This is the global consumption of energy that will occur as populations increase and as that increased population becomes richer. So, I don't want to present to you climate change because you know it very well, but it's part of the challenge that I'm going to try to present in the end. But let me just take you in a walk through climate change. We all know about climate change. It is definitely happening. Look at the typhoons in the Philippines. We are seeing extreme events occurring, weather events. But for sure, we know it is human caused. And I'll show you a graph. Remember the population graph? It's a corollary of that. Human population expands, our carbon dioxide emission levels go up, our temperatures go up, almost reflective of that. This is a bad graph. The previous graph went from 1100s, if you recall. So it goes flat and it goes up. I'll show you the same graph slightly differently, starting from the 1000, and it shows you the carbon dioxide levels on our planet. So many people ask, how can you be so accurate about carbon dioxide level more than 1,000 years ago? In fact, we are even more accurate than that, and we don't show it because the line is flat. The accuracy of the carbon dioxide data comes from the Antarctic. So what the Antarctic Society does is we drill a borehole for the ice, and the ice we can measure exactly what the atmosphere was 10,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, in fact 100,000 years ago. I held a piece of ice in my hand that was 60,000 years old. And you can see with your bare eyes the amount of carbon dioxide in that slice of ice. As we go back, that is higher on the ice strata, the amount of carbon dioxide intensifies. And the intensity level since the 1900s is very reflective of that population graph. Humans, carbon dioxide. Humans, temperature increase. That is a correlation that cannot be disputed. So, what does it all mean? What do we all know about it, but there is so much we still do not know about this equation. The simple equations is trees take on carbon dioxide, trees are good. Men are bad. We create power plants, we create industrial pollution. The pollution, the emissions release comes from carbon dioxide, fossil fuels, etc. The absorptions comes from nature, by and large. But the one big equation that we don't know is the seas. The oceans are playing an active role in this, and the absorption by our oceans, especially, is very high, but yet unknown. And the jet streams that cross, that brings the waters, circulates around the Indian Ocean, circulates around the Pacific, as well as the Atlantic Ocean. What is that jet stream doing, and how deep, where the water is extremely cold, is that helping create and churn the carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen? We know what's happening, the mechanics are still quite unknown. So the amount of unknown in this world is high, and this is where a lot of scientific research is still needed. When these things occur, when carbon dioxide goes up, when temperatures go up, what does it mean for us, for normals? Besides having to wear another sweater in winter maybe, more rain gear, it's actually shifting the dynamics, especially in developing countries, where their ability to adapt to these changes are more difficult. So in the developing world, we are seeing changes in agricultural production that's occurring in a phenomenal rate. Already, champagne from France, they've already done all the seeds and the grape, what is it called? Seedlings that is occurring in southern England now, off the shores of Dover. You need cold morning air to get those bubbles. So champagne is already moving up. Coffee is moving up, so you see the change in coffee that's occurring. Look at the coffee production in Uganda, it's pretty much been decimated. And if we look at island countries, the situation is far worse. It's affecting the way infectious disease moves. It's a planetary change. But nowhere is it more apparent than in the intensity of the rains that we are seeing, the intensity of the corollary are the droughts. In one area there's rains, in another area of the world there are droughts. And these extreme weather events is probably what is most noticeable to us as the immediate effect of climate change. And the promise that we are seeing is these events will occur more and with greater intensity. So, what I want to do is, with the ambassador's permission, I want to show you a little story of Jakarta, Indonesia. I'm really sorry that the animation doesn't work. This is a great video on what's going on in Jakarta, but even better is a little story that I want to tell you about Jakarta. Jakarta in 2007 and 2000 had intense rains in the city. And the city had 2 days of intense rain right in the heart of Jakarta City, which is in the north, and these are the mountains in the south. And then it stopped. It was sunny in Jakarta, but the flooding continued unabated. And in fact, it started raining very much in the southern islands, in the mountain areas of Puncak, it's called. And those rains started flowing down towards Jakarta, and the floods became so intense that the presidential palace was flooded during this event. So, I'm sorry, this is actually an incredible animation that we spent more than $1 million doing. But what we did with the Jakarta authorities and the government is every single little dot here is a measuring station, where we measured the water flow along the rivers, along the canals, and the overall measures of water throughout. And the way we captured flooding was a police signal post. Whenever the signal post went out, we knew it went above 1 meter, because the battery of the signal post was 1 meter high. So we were able to measure all this, and I'm afraid we have some connection problems. This thing is an animation. And when it goes, you see the date of January 31. We take it for a full 2 weeks. And when you see the water starts pouring down in Jakarta, what we do is we show you a different map of Jakarta itself. The water comes pouring down. The yellow area is where the flooding becomes intense. It doesn't have as much appeal without the animation, but I guarantee you the animation is great. So what we did was we took a Google Map Earth, and Mr. Investor, you know this is the center of Jakarta, where the big Monument Nasional is. It gets flooded. Right behind the presidential palace, it gets flooded. And everybody was talking. There's a place called Manggarai Gate. It's a big flood gate. And the big debate at the time was, why did you open that gate? The presidential palace got flooded because of that gate. We do the simulation and we showed it didn't matter whether Manggarai Gate was open or closed. The water was coming from Puncak in the south and was coming with velocity. And it actually went right over Manggarai Gate. And everyone was flooded. So for the first time in Jakarta's history, the rich, the most powerful, were all affected by the floods. And this thing had a serious impact. It impacted Jakarta to the tune of $1 billion in terms of damage. 600,000 people were displaced in some fashion, and 50,000 people went to hospital. Dengue, whatever. Serious impact on the city. As important as Jakarta. So, why is this occurring? There's 3 fundamental reasons why the floods are occurring in such a severe way. Number 1, we already talked about, is population. Again, if I showed you a population graph, this thing is another animation that shows the city of Jakarta growing. The red is the population of Jakarta. Jakarta by 2050 will be 35 million people. Greater Jakarta. It is already 10 million officially, where the center is called DKI Jakarta, but Greater Jakarta, Jabodetabek, is already 20 million people. This animation shows you everything going red. We have a corollary animation that's in green that shows you all the agricultural land. It shrinks. Population is number 1 reason why we have these floods. Because humans create what we call impervious materials. Concrete, asphalt, driveways. And that area that I mentioned to you, Puncak, up in the mountains here, is a very nice resort, very cool up in the mountains, and full of holiday homes. Full, it used to be all green, jungle, now all paved. So the water runoff, we call, that comes from the mountains of the rains, was running off into the city at 12 times the rate as normal. 12 times. So the rain that was occurring actually on February 6th and 7th in Puncak, within that same day was in Jakarta. And Jakarta is substantially lower. And certain parts of Jakarta is lower than sea level. So all the water stays, and it just compounds the amount of flooding because the impervious material no longer allows the ground to soak the water. It has serious consequences, especially because of the aquifers. The second is solid waste. With so much solid waste, especially the use of plastics, and already the technology exists to have plastics that biodegrade. And we had a big discussion with Unilever. Why can't you supply the world with biodegradable plastic bags? It's expensive. That's the only reason. And already in Croatia, I go to Diona and I have to pay whatever it is, 2 kunas for a plastic bag. That's what we want throughout the world. And we want it to go up and up because solid waste causes enormous flooding. The water cannot move the way it should. Finally, the main reason for flooding is actually Jakarta is sinking. It is sinking at a rate of about 2 centimeters, 1.75 centimeters a year. That is about that much, and that is huge when it comes to a city. And it's sinking because Jakarta has all these aquifers, and there's underground water resources that people are plugging into, usually 20 meters, sometimes as deep as 100 meters. The cavity that is filled, the impervious materials on top, the water is not being replenished quick enough. And there's a cavity in the aquifers. And the cavity in the aquifers are very slowly compressed by the heavy buildings, the asphalt, the concrete. And Jakarta is sinking. Jakarta is sinking at an alarming rate. And we have done satellite pictures to show how it was in 2004 versus 1976. The population level, the actual level vis-a-vis sea level, it keeps going down. And in certain areas, in fact, in the very areas where the flooding was the highest are the areas where the sinking is correspondingly high. So, what does all this mean? I'm not trying to give a scare story of Jakarta. In fact, Jakarta has decided to approach this, and the beginning of works has begun this month to deal with it. But the point I'm making is the point that I'd like to convey to you today, which is the single global challenge that we face. And it's about optimization. But let me make it a bit more concrete. With the changing demographics, the increased population that we're facing in the world, the corollary that we're seeing is global aging. In Europe especially, in rich Asia especially, people are aging and they're not producing kids to change. 2% is equal to parents, 2 kids, 0 growth. The population growth in OECD countries is substantially below. It's closer to 1.5. Negative population growth. Whereas population, we already know, is going to be 9 billion by 2050, coming from the less developed world. So, they are at 3, in many countries, 4% growth. So, this aging, lack of human resources versus an abundantness of human resources. And Croatia is facing youth unemployment, but if you go to the Middle East, we are seeing youth unemployment, that is, people under 29 unemployed at rates of 50%. 1 in every 2 people are unemployed. In Egypt, we're seeing it in Algeria, in Tunisia, throughout the Middle East. This means that migration will happen in a way that we still do not know, and Croatia may be a very attractive place for people to come. especially as an EU member state. Cities, with their massive growth, will change. And in fact, we are seeing changes in countries like Malaysia, Singapore, where urban agriculture is occurring. Agriculture is by floors, agriculture in cities, and the enormous savings that occurs is simply from transport costs. Transporting food to our cities, global estimate-wise, is almost about 50% of our transport fuel consumption. Enormous numbers we're talking about. So, urban agriculture, urban retrofitting, urban, especially in colder climates, what we call energy efficiency adaptation of buildings. This is a rather cold auditorium and can certainly use insulation, and that's the way it's moving into the future. Changes in cities, changes in megacities, and the corollary of a megacity are mega slums. These slums that we are seeing are more than 1 million people wide. We are seeing enormous changes in the way big countries address slums. We are seeing it in Brazil with the favelas. We're seeing it in South Africa with the townships. But we are seeing it throughout the world where urban population growth are pressing and pressing. And of course, we are seeing extreme environmental events. So, besides going on the tipping points, what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about what is our global challenge. Climate change is a fact that we have to deal with, but the challenge that I present to you is a challenge of optimization. It's a challenge of growth that is through shared prosperity. It's a challenge of elimination of extreme poverty. So, let's start with the first. What do I mean by optimization? When we look at this climate change agenda, the difficulty is not the science. The difficulty is doing a comprehensive solution that is globally acceptable. So the complaints that the developing world has is, you saw the map, for 100 years, the industrial world is partially and most likely mostly responsible for the climate change. They were the biggest emitters. They are, we see diagrammatically, the cause of the carbon dioxide and heating in the world was during that 100 years of industrial revolution by rich countries. So, should they do more to compensate? Is it fair that they say to the poor countries now that are now in the mouth of development, you cannot develop. Don't use fossil fuels. Use solar, use wind. Sounds great. Usually 5-6 times as expensive. Do these countries have that choice? How do we share in this growth agenda? We want growth, most certainly. We want the rich countries to continue growing and taking other countries with them. But how do we do it in a sensible way? That's the optimization problem we face in the world today. So, let me turn now a little bit to Croatia. Croatia's economy is in a very difficult situation, and it has been now for 5 years. This is the 5th consecutive year of recession for Croatia. We anticipate a small increase next year. But the difficulty that Croatia is facing, as is Europe, and as is the model that many countries around the world are trying to emulate with the United States growth model, the United Kingdom is doing that, we are seeing rapid growth, we are seeing rapid financialization, the strength of banks in the US and UK coming to the forefront. But the problem is the inequity has grown remarkably in these countries, especially the United States. So the United States model of growth has been very much a remarkable one and an admirable one, and many things we should be copying. But the inequality that has been going on has been perverse. We know that 1% of the United States population has 22% of its GDP. 1%. 0.01%, that's less than 30,000 people, own 11% of the United States GDP. This is a phenomenal number. We're talking trillions of dollars owned by 30,000 people. it's unfair. It cannot be sustained. It's not a matter of unjust. It's a matter of, can we sustain this type of economic model? And we're really rapidly understanding it's not sustainable. We're seeing this occurring in Europe with the growth model that we're talking about. There's austerity, no growth. It has to be done in a way that the prosperity can be shared throughout the spectrum of the economy. And that is the biggest economic challenge we face. So I bring to you the issue of climate change to show you that the optimization between nations, between the rich countries and the poor countries, is almost the same paradox, dilemma that we face with the optimization of the rich versus the poorest of the poor. How can we both grow in a shared prosperity? That, I think, is the biggest challenge we face today. Climate change is one such issue. Economic growth is another. The whole dilemma that we talk about nowadays of austerity versus growth, it is fundamental to what we learn in school today, which is the economics of optimization. So when you look at any economics program, if you're in grad school, you know about Lagrangians, Hessians. These are all mathematic tools of optimization, and it's a trade-off. So the trade-off we must face is we want the rich and the elite to continue making money and grow. We just need to share that more. So what does that mean for Croatia specifically? Croatia is a very rich country by any standards of the world. It's certainly an EU member state. It is one of the richer countries in that orange higher quadrant spectrum. And if you look at Croatia during that gapminder, it goes up and up and up, a little backward twist in the 90s, but continues going up. As a rich country, the role that it faces is, what is the role of government in Croatia? And I think there is a very large role for government. Government must continue to support and help the poor, the vulnerable, the people that cannot help themselves. And that's what makes Croatia such a great country. It does that very, very well. But it needs to do it in a much more focused way. It needs to focus on people that really, really need that money, not because you're entitled to it. And too much of Croatia is entitlement-based. You work for somewhere for a certain number of years, you get this. You are married to someone, you get this. You're born something, you get this. You go to this school, you get free, etc., etc. It has to change from an entitlement-based system to a needs-based system, and really help the people that need it. On the other side, they need to get out, and get out of the way quickly. They are far too involved on the governance of state enterprises, on every aspect of the economy the government is involved. In tourism, and some of your best sites, in these best sites are owned by government and underutilized. In fact, not utilized at all. So what is government doing in the productive sector? The conversation that we are having with not just Croatia, but the conversation throughout the world is finding the right role of government to move out at the higher end to allow the private sector and the engines of growth, that rich people's growth that I was talking, to continue, but to tax in the right way so that it can be shared, and to intervene at the lowest levels of society, the most vulnerable, to protect and to serve. That intermediation function is the optimization role that the economy is failing to do throughout the world. And that, I tell you, is the biggest challenge we face in the world today. We need to continue to grow as a world economy. We need to continue to feed 2 billion more people, but we need to do it in a way that we share our prosperity. And I think if I can leave you with one word today, it's shared prosperity. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge we face in the world today. Thank you. Between the rich and the poor that's rising, we are seeing the gaps between the rich countries and the poor countries widening as well. So rich countries are rich, getting richer, but the poorest of the poor countries have stayed the same. In that gapminder, please go play with it. You look at Malawi, you look at Ethiopia, you look at sub-Saharan Africa, and they are incomes that are pretty much steady state. And you look at all the European countries, including Croatia, all of rich Asia, Latin America, they are increasing and the gap gets wider. So you're talking about within an economy, the rich. Now, we are seeing differences amongst countries, among the behavior of the rich. So we are seeing the gap widening phenomenon. So there is something wrong with our model where the growth is occurring and it's being concentrated. So what can we do for wealth distribution? And your question is, are the rich giving out money by themselves? It's another question, is there a need for the government to intervene to take a little bit more of their money to give to the poor, or can they do it by themselves? I think he doesn't believe that very much. The internal dynamics of a company is about profit maximization, shareholder revenues. In fact, that's the part we don't want to mess around with. The growth of Apple, the growth of Walmart, the growth of Google, Skype, all these companies, that's the engine of growth that we want to continue to grow. But the question is the end result. And you're saying the workers are unfairly treated, so the country where they have done the best on that score is actually Japan. Japan has CEOs and senior executive pay caps. And the rough rule of thumb is 12-1. The lowest paid guy, the senior CEO, should not get 12 times more than the salary of the lowest paid staff. So yesterday in Switzerland, they had a vote on exactly this 12-1, and it was defeated. They said no to it. They will not cap senior banking executive salaries because of that engine of growth issue. And it's a polemic that is very difficult. I don't know what the answer is, honestly. So this engine of growth you want to preserve, but the equity distribution of wealth, the sharing of our prosperity has to improve. But we are seeing some good signs. One of the things that we're seeing, especially in the United States, is the proliferation of philanthropy. And we see this with Bill Gates Foundation, with Bill Buffett, William Buffett, and all these guys. They're actually actively engaged to give money away, which is great. Is it a core purpose to do it? Actually, it's really working. I told you, the other good thing is, it's only 0.01% of the population that has all this money, and almost half of them are involved in philanthropy. So the prospect looks good in a very small way. But the real wealth that's occurring is actually in Asia. Asia will probably have, we know, will have, China alone will have more millionaires than the United States within 15 years. And the concept of giving in the Asia context of a Bill and Melinda Gates is a little more foreign. It's much more family-oriented, and the families are large. Everybody's a relative when you're rich. So that concept of philanthropy has to take on different models and different ways of doing it. Do we do it at the corporate level? Do we do it at the individual level? Do we do it at the government level? My best answer to you on that is yes, yes, yes. It probably has to occur at all levels, but the part that's the most difficult is the governmental level, because that is what public sector is about, and we are trying to create civil servants that are indeed civil, and they are serving the population, and that's very difficult to find.
What do you think about France and their tendency to take 75% of the richest people, their wealth? What do you think about it?
The question is about France and the very high taxation that they have. Taxation, like unemployment compensation, there's a line that's called the activation line, or that marginal tax rate that is unproductive. So, like anything in economics, everything has there is a law of diminishing returns. You remember that? So at a certain point, negativity comes in. So in Croatia, one of the things that we notice is that the unemployment compensation is so generous that if they are to get a job in the market, working 8 hours a day, they end up getting maybe 50 kunas more, or 500 kunas, or something like very, very nominal more than not working at all. So why work? Why not have some gamish, hang out, get almost the same pay, than work 8 hours a day? That's the metrics that doesn't, and it's the activation metrics where the compensation, the unemployment compensation is too high, we're saying. So you want to make people go to work. Now, it's the same thing on the tax rate on the other side. 75% by any measure is high. So the normal working rule of thumb is about 35% corporate tax rates. Anything above is high, anything below, it's a very silly rule of thumb. But nonetheless, when you tax too much, the problem with the world today, it's a good thing, but it's a bad thing, is we are no longer borderless countries, bordered countries. What France does, it's going to be good for Monaco. It's going to be good for Croatia if they can do it. So it's a zero-sum game. Go ahead, France. Someone else will pick up the game. And the UK is flirting right now with danger as well when they want to walk away from the EU. Look at what the financial centers will do. They pick up and leave London, and we'll find another growth center somewhere else. So the flexibility of the response has to be measured in terms of the tax rate. By the way, tax rates are always better if it's lower and you have economic growth. It creates much more revenues than trying to tax and get that one-time thing and have patients die. It's not a good thing.